Hi, everybody. Just trying to pull up our chat. All right, welcome to Jersey Shore Women in Tech. I'm Jenna Gaudio, and I'm here with Stephanie Schmid. And before we get started, I just want to give anybody that isn't familiar with Jersey Shore Women in Tech a little bit of background. So Stephanie, if you want to sit tight for a second, I'm going to do a quick intro. So a little background on Jersey Shore Women in Tech. Allison and Brittany started this a couple years ago when they saw that there was a gap for a supportive network that could really be leveraged to help mentor and educate and bring women in business together and help better support a lot of what they've got going on. I was actually the first speaker about 2 years ago, and then I got really involved in the group and just really found all of the events that we had monthly very valuable. We usually meet in Asbury Park. All the events are always free. And we have different kinds of leadership and thought leaders come in and tell their story and give advice. And then usually there's a networking portion when we do these things in person. But as we get into it, I'll give you guys a little bit of ideas of different ways that we communicate online. So Allison is a product management lead at Defined Logic, and Brittany is a software management lead at Vidya. And I am the SVP of operations at Vidya as well. So places you can find us online. We're pretty much on every single social media platform out there. We love to post all different kinds of updates. But our favorite place to connect is on our Facebook group. So if you go to our Facebook page and like that, there's also a private Facebook group that exists. And inside, we have a bunch of different kinds of conversations where you can post things where you celebrate about a new job or promotion. You can suggest helpful webinars or classes or workshops that you've attended. You can share different kinds of articles or maybe a blog you've written. If you're looking to hire or if you're looking for a job, it's a good place to connect with people. We've had a lot of success within the organization for people that weren't even looking for a job to build synergy and find opportunity. And often if people just have questions or help or want to do a poll, it's been very interactive group. So, please join us. All you have to do is submit a request, and then everything in there is private. We're always looking for speakers. We have some exciting stuff in the pipeline, but if you or someone you know would be great thought leader to talk to the group, if you go to our website, jerseyshorewomenintech.com, there's an application you can fill out to get in touch. We have a great campaign going on GoFundMe. So Brittany really championed this campaign last year where we were able to raise money from the community. Everyone came together to help support young women inside of Neptune and Asbury Park communities to then go to robotics camp. There was great feedback. The girls were very excited. I was very successful. And we're very inspired to kind of bring everyone together again and send even more young girls to this camp. Our sponsors are the reason that we're here. So typically, we're meeting inside CoWorks, which is this beautiful co-working space at the Lake House building in Asbury Park. There's private office space and conference rooms available. And they have another location over High Voltage Cafe, which is by the Asbury Park train station. It's a beautiful building. The coffee shop is adorable. And there's these beautiful offices right above the coffee shop. And there's also a new location coming in Red Bank. And then Vidya is our other sponsor, which is where Brittany and I both work. Vidya is a music and media tech company located in Bellworks campus in Homedale. Vidya powers the business side of music labels and media companies through an all-in-one platform that allows users to manage content, rights, payments, and view reporting on analytics and revenue. Vidya is looking to hire a senior data engineer and a rights management specialist. So if anybody's interested, you can either apply online or shoot Brittany or me a message. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Stephanie, who is the Democratic candidate for Congress. And without further ado, I will send it back to you.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Jenna and Allison and Brittany and all the other women at Jersey Shore Women in Tech. It's a true honor to have the chance to speak with you this evening. I wish that we were gathering in person I think that women gathering and networking is one of the most powerful things that we can do across fields and industries. It's how I've gotten some of my own jobs. And so I look forward to a time when we can all gather together again and I can meet you all in person. But I'm so grateful for this opportunity and the chance to become a little bit more tech savvy myself. So Jenna has already taught me more than I could imagine about how to do presentations like this. And it's a great skill to have. So thank you all. As Jenna mentioned, I am a Democrat running for Congress here in New Jersey's 4th District. The 4th District is most of Monmouth County and then a portion of Ocean County, and over in Mercer, we've got Hamilton and Robbinsville. So in Ocean, it's the northern portion of towns. And you can look it up online or shoot me a message if you don't know whether you live in the 4th District or not. It tends to change every decade or so with redistricting. So some of you might think that you're in one district having an awesome congressperson like Frank Pallone, but in reality, you've been shifted over into New Jersey 4th and are currently represented by a man I've known for over 23 years now, Representative Chris Smith. And I don't want to talk too much politics tonight, but my journey sort of that we're going to discuss starts in his office back in the 1990s and ends here today with me running against him. So it's an interesting full circle experience that I think a lot of folks can relate to because my professional career and even my advocacy and personal life have all sort of revolved around this idea of when one door closes, another one opens, and what initially seemed to be a really tragic or sorrowful point in my career turned out to be the start of the next great thing. And it's only when you look back sometimes that you can see that trajectory. So I am blessed to come from a long line of very strong women. I'm just going to show you a picture here of some of those ladies. That's my dad's mom, my Nana, with my sister and I. And then in the middle is my mom when she was younger, Deborah Schmid. And on the far side is a picture of her mom and dad. And she's the baby there being held. And, you know, my Nana, my dad's mom, was strong enough to leave a really bad marriage when he was just an infant in 1950 and left her husband and moved across the state to give her son a better life. And I always admired her because you just knew she was made of steel and that she had gone through a lot of things as a young woman that had formed her into this opinionated, outspoken Nana who told me while smoking and watching Jeopardy that I could do anything I wanted and I should never let a man tell me what to do. And my mom, you know, very similarly has an incredibly strong character and has shaped so much of my life. She's a role model, a hero, and my best friend. And I'm so lucky to have her with me on the campaign trail. I was lucky enough to have her with me in Haiti throughout some of my foreign service experiences. And we've really shared so much of life together. But she grew up in a family where her dad didn't believe that women should go to college. And she had to fight just for the opportunity to get more education. And she, you know, defied her father's wishes and suffered for it. He didn't speak to her for a number of years, but she became the first member of her family to graduate from college and obtain a 4-year degree by working during the day and putting herself through night school. And she is one of the most brilliant women I know, and she never takes no for an answer. And she taught me that growing up. And so I don't think I would be where I am today if I wasn't standing on the shoulders of these women. And they, you know, they suffered tragedies and pain throughout their life. I think we all have. I certainly have. But what they taught me was about resiliency and service and always picking yourself up and getting back into the arena. So I admire them both so greatly, and I'm sure that many of you have similar strong women and role models in your life. So the summer of 1997, I am a Jersey girl. My family is getting ready for our annual trip down to the shore. I wasn't lucky enough to grow up in Monmouth County, but I knew that I would make my home here when I was an adult. We lived in Bergen County in Ridgewood, and my favorite part of every year was coming down to the beach. The water has always spoken to me, and I took my first steps on the boardwalk, so it's an integral part of who I am. So it will surprise you to learn that I gave up that summer trip to head down to Washington, D.C. And I had not planned on going to Washington. I hadn't thought about interning for a congressperson. I had my heart set on going to something called Governor School, which I think a lot of you will remember. And New Jersey had a really incredible summer program for students. And I applied and I didn't get in, and I was devastated. But from that rejection, the first of very many in my life, I was forced to sort of search for a different summer program and experience, and found the Washington Workshops Foundation, which is an incredible group that is still around to this day and brings high school students from all over the country to Washington, D.C. to learn about our federal government and how a system of checks and balances should be functioning. And we had seminars and opportunities to speak to members of Congress, members of the executive branch, leading agencies, and the Supreme Court. It was a really heady experience. And a lucky few of us were assigned internships after applying on Capitol Hill in Congress. And this Jersey girl was assigned to the office of one Congressman Chris Smith. And he's in the upper corner, directly behind the woman with the red skirt on. And he was actually elected to represent this part of New Jersey back in 1980, the year I was born. So by the time I got to Washington in 1997, he'd been serving in Congress for 17 years and had made a name for himself as a fierce anti-choice advocate, somebody who believed that not only should abortion be illegal, but advocated very vociferously for restrictions on and banning of access to birth control. He wrote a bill in the 90s that tried to change the definition of our federal rape statute to limit what constituted a sexual assault under federal law, in part because he wanted to limit women's access to reproductive health care services. And so obviously, I did not apply to work in Congressman Smith's office because we didn't really have much in common, but there I found myself. And it was an interesting summer because he's also a very senior member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and they do the business of human rights and foreign policy work. And it was my first exposure to those issues. I went to so many incredible hearings and participated on behalf of the office, and it ended up shaping my entire professional life. One of the most awkward things for me in that internship was that, as you can see, there were a lot of men in the office, and they felt really comfortable voicing their opinions on what women should and shouldn't do with their bodies. I even have a thank you note that folks wrote for me from that summer telling me to be careful in college and guard my virtue and make sure I stayed on the right side of things, to not stray to the left, and to always remember that life was the defining issue, how they would phrase abortion of our times. And, I hadn't thought much about reproductive rights at that point in my life, but I knew that fundamentally it felt wrong to have a bunch of middle-aged men freely offering their opinions on what I should and shouldn't do with my body and my life. And so kind of from that moment was a feminist and a human rights advocate, a women's rights advocate born. I went on to Yale University, where I majored in women's and gender studies and political science, focusing on women in politics. I did a lot of work around issues of violence against women, working in courthouses and the emergency room to make sure that women could obtain restraining orders and assistance when they were in difficult situations. I served on the Yale Sexual Harassment Grievance Board, adjudicating complaints by students and teaching assistants against faculty. And I then went on to law school at the University of California at Berkeley, where I, again, focused a lot of my work on these issues of violence against women and helping them obtain access to critical legal sources. And I expanded my work at that time to work on asylum and immigration issues, helping families who are fleeing violence in Central and South America apply for asylum here in the United States. And as a young lawyer, that was really the work that I was interested in doing. And I went on after law school to work in our federal courts for a couple of years as a young law clerk. And this was the first time that I really experienced professional discrimination in the workplace. And I know that, in law school, women were actually 65% of my class at the University of California at Berkeley School of Law. And it was just an environment where everybody took for granted our right to be there and our sort of position and place at the forefront of all of these issues. And it wasn't until I was working in Manhattan on the Southern District of New York that I realized how many people took one look at me and didn't take me seriously. So when I was clerking for a judge there, we would often be in the court assisting the judge, and inevitably, the male attorneys that came in would assume I was a secretary or an intern, dump their coat in my hands, ask me to get them a cup of coffee. And I took great delight in seeing the looks on their faces about 10 minutes later when I was sitting up next to the judge and they realized that I was actually the federal law clerk who was handling their case and would be making a recommendation to the judge on how to decide the issue and helping to draft the opinion. And I used to take the files of the attorneys who had just assumed that I wasn't a lawyer or someone of importance and slap them to the bottom of the calendar so that they had to sit there an extra long time and look at me and realize that I too was the face of an attorney and in a position of power and authority. And I've had those experiences throughout my career of being underestimated or not taken seriously. And it's easy to be offended, but I've actually learned and worked to sort of use them in my favor. And I'll tell a story about that when I was at the State Department that I think is really eye-opening. The other experiences that I wanted to share from my legal career that I think will resonate with women, particularly in the private sector, there are two. And one is a really great experience. When I was out working on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, I was assigned an appeal from an immigration decision where a judge had denied a woman's claim for asylum. And I had to argue the case before a panel of 3 older male judges. And the woman's claim for asylum was based on a very violent assault that happened to her by military police. And the lower court judge had decided that her claim wasn't credible because her story had significant, as he put it, gaps in it. And how could she be credible if she couldn't tell a coherent narrative? And so I did what any good young lawyer would do, and I looked into the record and I read her testimony. And her recount of that evening and that violent assault began with the phrase, "I was dragged out of my house in the middle of the night and kicked repeatedly in the head by officers with steel-toed boots." And so the argument that I made to the court was that the gaps in this woman's narrative of that evening were what made her story credible, because she had suffered a violent and concussive physical assault. at the beginning of the evening. And so it made sense, both medically and as a victim of sexual violence suffering from PTSD, that she would not be able to recount what happened to her minute by minute in a linear fashion. And one of the proudest moments of my life was getting the court to overturn that decision and knowing that that woman now is a citizen in the United States, having received asylum here. And that power, that ability to tell the stories of people whose voices often aren't heard, to lift them up and be an advocate and amplify their voice, is why I got into law. It's why I went on to be a United States Foreign Service officer, and it's why I'm running for Congress. And I could relate to that woman's story so clearly, as I know many of you can, because I myself am a survivor of violence. And though that assault happened nearly 20 years ago, I can tell you down to the, exact detail what shoes I was wearing and what my outfit was that night, but I cannot tell you the name of the person that assaulted me. And so I think that as women, we have a real duty and power in the workplace and in the world to speak out about these issues and to act as validators of other women's experiences. And because I knew exactly what she was suffering from, I was able to give voice to that and help her win that case. Another story from my legal career, just really briefly, is that around the time I was thinking about joining the Foreign Service, our economy was cratering in 2008 and 2009, and I was working at a law firm, and about half of the associates were women and half were men. And one day, an older female attorney approached me and she said, "I think you need to know something." And she pulled me aside and explained that the firm had actually fired almost all the other women attorneys except for me and one other, and kept all the men on. And they were letting the women still come to work as they searched for jobs, but they had told them that you do not have a job here 3 months from now. And I was horrified when I found out that every person that had been let go was a single woman, while all the breadwinning male associates who had families at home, like we don't have families at home, still had their jobs. And that was the end of my private practice law career, essentially. I quit that law firm, marched into the managing partner's office and said, I cannot be a part of a place that treats half of its employees as if they're expendable, and left. And I began this journey to becoming a United States Foreign Service officer. It took almost 2 years to pass a battery of tests, but in 2011, I raised my right hand and swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, an oath that I take very seriously to this day and feel is even more important. And I deployed overseas as a United States Foreign Service officer, working on what we would call political issues, working to help other countries' legislative bodies, their parliaments, pass rule of law reform, working with political parties to strengthen their infrastructure and their democratic foundations and elect more women to office, and then making sure countries like Port-au-Prince, like Haiti, I was based in the capital of Port-au-Prince, had free and fair elections. And that doing that work for the United States was the greatest privilege of my life. I spent over 7 years at the Department of State working on these issues. And again, I looked very different from what most folks, and especially men overseas in more patriarchal and traditional cultures, believe to be a diplomat, a professional person of substance and value. And I had the imprimatur of being a representative of the United States every time I walked into a room. But that didn't mean that I wasn't being regularly underestimated. And this is when I decided to finally use this to my advantage. I was now in my 30s and much more confident about myself. And I decided to take advantage of the fact that many of these men didn't think much of my abilities. And so specifically, I used to be invited back into the chamber of the Haitian Senate to sit with the senators as they were deliberating. And they would offer me ice cream and cookies and candy. And they just wanted to talk to me. And I also think they wanted to look at me. And they didn't think much about saying what they really thought about the US government, about particular legislation we were pushing. And I think they didn't think about it because they didn't think I understood Creole. And they didn't think I could pick up on their French. They thought, oh, this little blonde girl doesn't really understand what we're saying. Au contraire, I understood every single word, and I actually won an award for my work in Haiti on a series of investigative reports back to the US government about what was going on there, because I gained all of this incredible intelligence and information because these men underestimated me and didn't think that I could understand what they were saying. And so I remember our ambassador, another really strong woman, turning to me and saying, we're never putting a man in this job again because we've never gotten this kind of incredible reporting. Thank you so much for playing the game and getting us the information that we needed. And that was a really powerful moment for me in my career because I realized that it didn't matter what people on the outside thought. In fact, in this case, it worked to my advantage to be underestimated. But I knew my worth, and I had bosses and mentors who also knew my worth and empowered me to continue to grow and gave me more responsibility. And I also had the wonderful opportunity to work with some of the few Haitian women who have been elected to national office in their country. And at the time, out of 30 senators, one was a woman. And out of 100 lower house representatives, the House of Deputies, only 5 were women. And these are women who literally faced physical acts of violence just for announcing that they would run. They and their families were threatened repeatedly. And I understood for the first time what a real privilege it was to live in a country and a democracy where women could step forward and run for office. And I know that we do still face challenges and barriers, and I'll talk about some of those in a little bit, but we are very lucky to live in a country where we are able to run for office without threats of physical violence for the most part, where we are able to participate in the workforce. And we have a lot of work to do, but I do just want to say that having lived overseas in developing countries and democracies, I really came to appreciate and be so grateful to be a citizen of the greatest democracy in the world. And we've got a lot of work to do in our own country, but I am so proud to be an American and to represent some of the best human rights values that I was able to advocate for in this administration, in the previous administration. And so what I kind of want to talk about now is how I ended up leaving the Department of State. And after I left Haiti, I served in several other assignments at the State Department, including leading our work with the Freedom Online Coalition, a group of like-minded countries who are fighting to protect freedom of speech online. And so it's exciting to talk to tech folks about these issues. But I also faced discrimination at the State Department. I ended up suing the department for a violation of equal employment opportunity law. I had been harassed by several superiors on the basis of my sex. I knew that they had done this to other women before. And I felt as an attorney, as somebody who was actually trained as an equal employment opportunity counselor to help other people at the department, I just felt this great onus to proceed with the case and report these folks to make sure that they never did this to somebody else. And the State Department is actually, and the Foreign Service in particular, still very much a bastion of the old boys network. And there are fewer women serving at the highest levels of our diplomatic corps than almost anywhere else in the government. And one of the reasons is because, unfortunately, harassment and assault are still a significant problem at the department. And I spent 3 years litigating this case while working there, but also working actually with a Congresswoman Jackie Spear of California, telling my story and helping them write legislation to address this issue at the State Department. And so by this point in my career, at the law firm, I had been afraid to speak out publicly about the wrong that I saw because I didn't want it to impact me professionally. But by the time I was in my mid-30s and had sort of seen these patterns throughout a lot of our workplace, I knew that it was incumbent upon me and others to speak up about the harassment that we were facing in order to force change and to make the world a better place for younger women. And so while it cost me deeply, professionally and personally, to do it, I pursued that case. And then I pursued legislation to help, systemically change how the State Department addresses these situations. And I think that that's sort of been my approach to my life, which is to, thanks to my mom and my Nana, to speak out when I see an injustice and a wrong and to fight to make things better. I believe in working within the system. I am not somebody who is a part of the burn it all down branch of things, but there is always room for improvement. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have been able to work on that legislation and pursue my case and know that the people that did this to me weren't going to do it to another woman because I had the strength and the knowledge as a lawyer and an expert to fight, not just on my behalf, but on behalf of other women. So while all of this was going on, the presidential election of 2016 happened, and I lasted about 18 months in the current administration. I didn't leave until the spring of 2018, but what I witnessed, the attacks on human rights, particularly on women's rights and LGBTQ rights that were made by incoming officials at the State Department, decisions like essentially shuttering our Global Women's Issues Office that had done work all over the world to advance women's rights and promote women entrepreneurs, was shut down. Many of the senior women who have been mentors and that I had, whose careers I admired and wanted to follow were forced out of their jobs, forced to retire, as well as senior diplomats of color and LGBTQ diplomats. And that was greatly distressing to me. And then in the spring of 2018, massive sections of our annual human rights reports, which sort of cover the whole state of issues in each country around the world on human rights, had sections deleted that had to do with violence against women, with women's access to reproductive health care services, and for the struggle of marriage equality around the world. And I just knew that I could not remain at the State Department. I needed to go and speak out against what I saw happening in this administration and fight back. So I ended up, oh my goodness, you guys, I'm so sorry. I forgot to play the Foreign Service part of the slideshow. This is where the talking and the tech don't match up. But here are the Foreign Service slides. Sorry you didn't get to see them while I was talking about it. But after I left the State Department, basically, I ended up going to the Center for Reproductive Rights, where I was recruited to lead their U.S. foreign policy program. And this is what made me think of it. I knew we had this picture. And what we did at the center was fight back against attacks on women's access to healthcare around the world, including a horrible policy called the Global Gag Rule, which basically prevents foreign NGOs from offering women any sort of counseling or referrals or services on reproductive health care if they accept any sort of financial aid from the United States. Which slide? Yep.
Sorry guys, my bad. The internet seems to be going in and out because of the wind, but we're back and we're going to pick up where we left off. So I think we were on, let me go back to your slides.
The reproductive rights. Okay. No problem. Okay, let me start sharing. Let's see if we can actually do this. How's that, Jenna? Can you see? Yep. Yeah, so after I left the State Department, I was at the Center for Reproductive Rights. Sorry if I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but I'm not 100% sure where we cut out. So I was fighting a policy called the Global Gag Rule, which is a really awful policy that has been put in place by successive Republican administrations since 1984. Congressman Schmid is actually one of the architects of and biggest proponents of this policy. And the Global Gag Rule basically prohibits foreign nonprofit organizations from doing any work around issues of reproductive rights or access to reproductive health care services if they accept any money from the United States government. And that's to do any work. So it's not just that they're saying you can't use the US's money to do this work. They're saying you can't use any money, your own money from another country or an organization. You have to choose. And it's a really destructive policy that we know from a number of studies basically just causes a spike in unsafe abortions and leads to the deaths of thousands of women around the world and the orphaning of many children. And so it's a destructive policy that the Center for Reproductive Rights and other groups have been fighting against under this administration and previous ones. And so when I joined the center in 2018, we were working on this issue. And then I said, hey, I left the State Department when they were deleting all these sections of the human rights reports. And I think that that's a really dangerous move on their part, because those are the reports that I used as a young attorney to help advocate for that woman we were talking about in her asylum case. They're critical reports that are used by governments and NGOs and journalists and organizations around the world. And if we erase sections of reporting, if we erase the violence women experience trying to access reproductive health care, the problems and the hurdles that they face, the violations of their rights, we literally are erasing that experience from the world record. And so I came up with a piece of legislation called the Reproductive Rights or Human Rights Act of 2019. I wrote the bill, and along with my colleagues here in the picture at the center and a bunch of other organizations, we successfully lobbied for its introduction in Congress. I'm very proud to say that the bill has over 180 sponsors in both the House and the Senate, including almost all of our New Jersey delegation, except, of course, Congressman Schmid. And it was doing all of this work on women's rights and reproductive rights and pushing back against the restrictions that were put in place by this administration, that put me back in front of my old boss from my internship in 1997 when I was just 16 years old. And now I was 38 years old. And my first thought was, how on earth can you still be in Congress? You were elected in 1980, the year I was born, and I'm now approaching my 40th birthday, and you're still in office and you're still doing bad things for women's rights and LGBTQ rights. And I know New Jersey. I am from there. I know our values, and you don't represent them. And so I sort of watched in 2018 as people that I knew and admired, Tom Malinowski, who I worked with at the State Department, came back home to Jersey and ran for Congress and won. Andy Kim, who I knew from my work with Foreign Policy for America, an organization that was active beginning in 2015 and involved in the 2016 elections. Andy came back home to New Jersey and he ran for Congress and won. And then I've done a lot of work with Emily's List because I believe it's really important to elect more women to office. And through that work, I met an amazing veteran and woman named Mikey Sherrill, and she ran and won for Congress in New Jersey in 2018. And so I watched all these amazing people with backgrounds like mine step forward and say, I feel called to serve our country. I think we need more people in Congress who have worked in the government, who have served their country, who believe in the awesome power and responsibility to do good for their fellow citizens. And then I was simultaneously doing battle with Chris Smith on all of these issues. And I started thinking to myself, what if I came back home and ran against him? And it's a really scary thing to think that you have what it takes to run for Congress. And I thought about all of those people who had underestimated me throughout my life. And I knew that there would be more of them as soon as I announced that I was putting myself forward for this office. But I had fought back and won. I had, used folks underestimating me to my advantage to, further our country's mission. And I just knew that I was strong enough, thanks to my mom and my Nana, thanks to my female mentors like Ambassador Pamela White in Haiti, thanks to the strong women at the Center for Reproductive Rights. I was strong enough to put myself forward and run for Congress. And I was doing it because I truly believe that our country is at a crisis point. We have lost our way as a democracy. People no longer believe in science and data. People no longer believe in service and government as a function of good, government helping people. And I believe all of those things. I really, truly believe in the power of legislation to change people's lives. And I knew that legislation could change people's lives because I'd worked with Congresswoman Spear on that bill to change how the State Department adjudicates cases of sexual harassment and assault. And I had written the Reproductive Rights or Human Rights Act. And I know that when it passes Congress and is signed into law by hopefully President Biden, that it will have the power to impact the lives of so many women and girls around the world. And so I put myself forward to run for this seat because I believe that my story stands in stark contrast to Congressman Smith's. I believe that it's time for a new generation of leaders to step forward and run for office. Women and men who have served their country with dignity and respect, who believe in the power of government, who will put our public health and safety first and foremost, will put our country over party and people over partisan bickering. And I'm really been amazed at how much that message has resonated. It's been such an amazing opportunity to go travel throughout Monmouth, Mercer, and Ocean counties, and now in our pandemic world to appear virtually with you all and talk to all the different folks across our community about what matters most: helping small business owners, lowering our tax burden, making sure that we fulfill our need to ensure that healthcare is a human right. So working to expand access to coverage, lower costs, particularly for prescription drugs, and guarantee that every American has health insurance and access to quality, affordable care. These are the issues that I'm running on and that resonate for me. And one of the things that I think that you guys might find most interesting is about women in political representation, and specifically in New Jersey. So we had our first female Congresswoman elected to represent New Jersey almost 100 years ago in 1925. Mary Teresa Norton was a Democrat who was elected to Congress. And we've had some success in electing more women. We have 12 representatives serving in the lower chamber in the House of Representatives, and Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill and Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, who were elected respectively in 2018 and 2015, are badass members of our delegation. Congresswoman Watson Coleman is the first Black woman and woman of color to represent New Jersey in Congress. And I'm greatly inspired by both of them, but that's 2 out of 12. And no woman has ever represented New Jersey in the Senate. And while, Mary Teresa Norton was the first woman elected in 1925, if I were to win, when I win in November, I will only become the 8th Congresswoman to represent a district in New Jersey. Congresswoman Watson Coleman was the 6th, Congresswoman Sherrill is the 7th, and it's been 100 years. And between 1925 and 2015, 90 years, when Congresswoman Watson Coleman was elected, we only had a handful of women serve New Jersey on both sides of the aisle in Congress. Nationally, as of 2019, 126 women are serving in the United States Congress, 25 in the Senate, and 101 women in the House of Representatives, which is what I'm running for. And that constitutes just 23% of our representation. So women account for far less than the 50% of elected officials that they should be in the United States. We are 52% of this country. We're close to 56% of registered voters, but yet we represent only 23% of folks serving in the US Congress. And I think that has to change. And what my entire life has taught me is that representation matters. Diversity of representation matters so much because of the experiences that you bring to the table. A male law clerk could not have argued that woman's asylum case nearly as well as I could have. And I don't feel cocky saying that. I say that because I knew her story, because I saw pieces of me and pieces of my lived experience in her struggle. And I was able to articulate that and advocate for it in a way that no man could. And similarly, I feel like all of the work that I've done to write legislation and litigate and sue on behalf of women has been critical work, and it's a missing perspective or an underrepresented perspective in so many of the halls of power in our state and in our federal government. There are women right now in New Jersey rightfully advocating to have a female representative on the redistricting commission that will decide how all of our districts for state and local offices and also federal offices are drawn in 2021. And I can't believe in the year 2020, within a democratically controlled government, that we live in a state where there won't be a single woman's voice on that commission unless something changes. And so I just wanted to sort of close out on my talk about my run for Congress by situating it within the history of our state and our country, and encourage you all, if you aren't involved, to get more involved in politics, because I think that one of the things we're seeing from this pandemic is how critically important it is to have a functioning government at all levels, local, state, and federal, working on behalf of our public health and safety. Whether or not we want to be engaged politically on a daily basis or enjoy politics, we know that it impacts our daily lives so much. And so I encourage folks to get involved and make sure that you're registered to vote and that you vote, because I truly believe that each vote matters and that we have a voice and a chance to change things. And before I take questions, I'll just sort of some of the takeaways for me from my life, both professionally and personally, are sort of what I alluded to at the beginning, which are that it is our hardships and the challenges and the struggles that we face that really forge who we are and make us into stronger, more committed people. And I don't wish the challenges that I have faced on anyone else, but I am also so grateful for the experiences I've had that have led me to this point and made me who I am today. I think that what I learned, in my 20s and 30s and now about to enter my 40s, is that the further we advance in our careers as women, the more apparent it becomes that things are not equal. Things are not equal and fair and just when 65% of graduates from law school, 55% of graduates from college are women, and entering classes at all sorts of law firms and corporations are evenly divided amongst men and women. And then as you climb up whatever ladder you're climbing, it's the women and the people of color that fall away. And we need to do so much work to make sure that the middle and tops of our pyramids and structures look much more representative of our country than they do right now, because representation matters. And then I think I also just take away the fact that even though it can cost you personally and professionally, if you are able to lift up your voice and call out injustice and inequality and challenge poor decisions that are made in your workplace or in an organization that you volunteer at, I encourage you to do it, because though the cost can be high, the cost of inaction is much greater. And I do not regret any of the decisions that I've ever made to speak out. Even if they may have closed a door for me, they have opened another opportunity. And I am so grateful for all the people that listened and lifted me up during the dark points of my life, as well as during the successful ones. And then I guess I don't want to close on a negative note, but I also don't want you to think that running for Congress means that I finally made it, because we need to acknowledge that women are held to such a higher standard when we step forward into the public arena. And we've seen it time and again in national races. And I'll just share a few little anecdotes from my own story, because I think that they might resonate with you. One is that when I announced my run publicly, an old significant other reached out to a member of my family and said, "Who does she think she is? She better not run for office." And then just a couple of weeks ago, I got an email from a supporter, a very encouraging, supportive woman. And she said, "I just want to share some advice with you, and I hope that you take it to heart." And she went on to say that she'd watched all of my videos and presentations, and she wanted to give me some advice about my hair and my body language and my posture and my walk. And she said I could really, really hone in on it because I watched every presentation that you did on mute. And I thought to myself, wow, with friends like this. But I do think it's important to say that you should never watch somebody running for public office on mute, because what matters is what they're saying, not what they're wearing when they say it or how their hair is done. And I just wanted to share those things because I know that this is rampant in all parts of life, and it is extremely unfortunate that women will always be held to a different standard. And the people of color face similar and even worse acts of discrimination and discounting their experience and their value and their knowledge. But the silver lining that I will leave everyone with is that frequently women are given an opportunity to lead during times of crisis. We see it in the research about corporations. Business goes through a really difficult time and investigation, and suddenly there's a female CEO or a CEO of color. And we also see it in government office and leadership, that sometimes folks turn to who they perceive to be the outsider to bring about change. And so while we find ourselves at a crisis point in this country, going through a very difficult moment, one of, I think, the worst in my entire lifetime, a public health crisis, a global pandemic, a real lack of leadership at the national level, it is an opportunity for women to step forward and shine. Women volunteers, state and local officials, women running for federal office, all of us have an opportunity to demonstrate what true leadership looks like, what innovative thinking and solutions look like. And it is the silver lining of this current crisis. It's the new window or door that's opening as another one shuts. And so I am excited about the next 6 months. I'm excited about the chance to be on the ballot and represent the amazing people of Monmouth, Mercer, and Ocean counties. And I am so grateful for the chance to share with you all some of the stories from my life, and look forward to your questions. And the last thing I'll just ask is that if you were intrigued by what I said tonight, that you check out our website and our social media and follow us and like us and come to our events, and maybe even consider clicking the volunteer button on my page to join our efforts. And again, just thank you so much.
Wow, that was a very powerful story. Oh, looks like I'm echoing a little bit. Are you okay to take some questions?
Yeah.
All right.
My favorite part.
The first one is, if you're elected, what will be the first thing you do? What will be your first action as a Congresswoman?
Wow. I mean, the list is so large, but I think that our top priority has to be expanding access and coverage to healthcare. There's a bill in the House of Representatives right now that I think, well, I know will pass, and then we just need the Senate and the President to pass. It's called the Medicare for America Act. And what it would do, and it's so relevant right now, is that anytime somebody becomes uninsured, loses their health insurance, becomes underinsured, or just requests it, they are enrolled in the Medicare program, so that we make sure that nobody is without health insurance in our country. And I think seeing the massive increase in lack of insurance tied to lack of employment and loss of employment makes this really critical. The bill also empowers our federal government to negotiate the price of prescription drugs directly, and so that will dramatically lower our healthcare costs. And it also works to eliminate high deductibles and premiums, but it preserves the option of choice for those who do not want to be enrolled in a Medicare program. So I think that that middle road is one that we need to take. We cannot instantaneously transition to a system of government insurance for all having worked in the federal government, I know what happens when we wholesale switch from one system to another, and it's not a pretty sight. And so this is a bill that does all the important things that I think are necessary right now, which is acknowledge that healthcare is a human right, not a privilege, and every American deserves to have access to quality, affordable healthcare, and no one should be without healthcare coverage. So I really support that bill, and I look forward to working with leadership to pass it immediately.
I definitely feel that on a deep level. Next question. Have you ever changed a company culture, a boss, a colleague, etc., just by talking with them? Or did it always end in some sort of major action being taken either against them or just you quitting?
Yeah, no, that's a fair point, right? I told all the dramatic stories, but no, I think the answer is yes, every day. I think one of the most radical things that you can do in the workplace is just be an open person and look for opportunities to share your perspective with someone that aren't confrontational. And I think most change actually happens when we engage in those uncomfortable conversations, or you're afraid they're going to be uncomfortable, but they really aren't because somebody just didn't see it that way. And I've done that, in every workplace that I've been in, and learned so much and grown myself from hearing other people's perspectives on an issue or, a workplace sort of piece of legislation or a rule, a regulation that you think needs to change, but actually when you listen to the other side doesn't. And so I think that that's been the vast majority of my experience. I highlighted the times when I said absolutely not and stood up and left the room because I didn't have any other recourse. But I think most of the change that we're talking about happens when we're willing to make ourselves vulnerable by sharing our experience and offering a different perspective, and then listening, which I think is the most important and underutilized quality in the workplace, particularly in management, because you actually tend to learn a lot more and gain a lot more respect if you listen.
Kind of on the same leg as that, I know that we've talked a lot inside of this community about imposter syndrome. It seems like you are very confident, very powerful, very decisive woman, and obviously women have run the whole spectrum on how they engage and present themselves and how confident they are. Is there a time where like you felt that syndrome of like, can I do this? Or have you always just had like a straight shoot on your career of being like, here's what I want to do, here's what I'm passionate about, here's what I'm capable of? Or did you have to give yourself a pep talk now and then and say, can I do this? I'm pretty sure I can do this, and convince yourself to get to that finish line?
Yeah, no, imposter syndrome is so real, and I think most women experience it on a regular basis. I certainly have. I experienced it yesterday. I just had a really bad call, a conversation actually with a former law partner at that law firm that I left. And I'd seen that he had supported a lot of women running for office. And I thought, I'm going to give him a call because he's donated to women like me, and maybe he'll be interested in learning about my campaign. And he was like, first of all, he didn't remember me. And even though I worked for him for over a year on a case as his only associate. And then second of all, he was like, ugh, you're the one running for Congress. How dare you call me? And it was a horrible moment because I was like, if I can't get people who actually know me and have worked with me to support me, how can I get people that don't know me? But then today I had a conversation with a total stranger, and he's donating the campaign, he's volunteering. He said, I know some people who live in your district and I can introduce you to them. And so I think that the way we combat imposter syndrome is just by getting up every day and starting over. That you can't let whatever happened the day before or in the job before or the relationship before define what's happening now. So I'm a hopeful person, but I think that it tests our limits, right? Because if you get knocked down too many times and you don't have that great conversation or that great mentor, you start to doubt yourself. And that's when I always reach out to the people that have known me forever, the people that knew me before I ever did anything worth knowing me about. those people don't care that I'm running for Congress. They don't care that I was a diplomat. They can tell really embarrassing stories about me, and they have, but they're my ride or die girlfriends. And I think it's always important to check yourself, both when you're down and when you're riding high, with those folks who are your support system and know you. And that's how I deal with it.
I think that's excellent advice. So we got a couple more questions. How do you feel about income inequality in America? Do you feel like there's anything you can do in your sector to help level the playing field once elected?
Yeah, I mean, we all know that income inequality is one of the worst issues facing, I think, my generation and those below us, right? We are, for such a long time, folks who were born into, the working class or the middle class, people like my mom, the first to go to college, were able to improve their economic situation in this country and live a better life economically than their parents did. And that's no longer the case. I mean, we have seen spiraling student debt. We've seen, wages stay very stagnant, even in professional jobs like the legal sector, let alone, hourly wages. So I think that there's no easy policy fix here, right? One of the policies that I've been because it's a wholesale change and a different way of looking things. So one, it means we need to elect younger leaders, because right now the average age of somebody serving in Congress is in their 60s. And I think part of the problem here is that there's zero incentive to change the system when you have benefited from the system, right? You see that with climate change advocacy and advocacy over income inequality and student debt and healthcare. The system was put in place by these folks and they benefited from it, and they don't have a lot of incentive to change. I think that we need to address the student debt crisis. I think that we need to ensure that wages are lifted and do a lot to lessen the gap between an executive and the lowest paid worker in all sorts of industry. And the way I think we do that is through our tax and investment policy. So I'm very cognizant of the fact that I'm one of the only people in my friend group or peer group that owns a home. And the only reason I own a home is because I didn't have student debt. And so I was able to take the money that would have gone to those debt payments and instead use it to invest and build up my equity. I bought my second home. I mean, one home, but I was able to sell and then get another one. And that is rare. It used to be the American dream, but I'm about to turn 40 and I know very few people that own houses, and they're all have good paying jobs. So I do think that the student debt crisis is sort of the first thing that we need to do. And it starts with greatly expanding our student loan relief programs and capping the amount of interest that can be caused, and also looking at the education sector really hard and saying this shouldn't be a for-profit industry where major universities have billions and billions of dollars in their endowment and they continue to raise the cost of their tuition so that folks are taking on more and more debt.
Kind of along the same lines where you mentioned about having to unseat these men that have been there for a while, we have a question. Chris Smith has had a stronghold on District 4 for decades. What strategies are you using to get your message across and secure votes in a historically red district?
Yeah, so right, this district is one of the last seats held by a Republican. It would be the only one if Jeff Van Drew down in South Jersey had not changed parties. So after the 2018 election, Chris Smith was the last Republican. That's in part because this district has been drawn to keep him in office. But what are we doing? I talk a lot about issues that I think matter to everybody. It doesn't matter what political party you are. We all agree that we pay way too much in taxes in New Jersey, and we don't get enough back from our federal government. It's almost a 2-to-1, right? For every dollar that we send to Washington, we get back 50 cents or less on that dollar. And we pay so much, particularly in our state and local property taxes, to have a first-class education system. I'm a proud product of Jersey public schools, but we're no longer allowed to deduct those on our federal taxes. So I offered those issues as things that they resonate whether you're an independent, a Republican, or a Democrat. Everybody feels very strongly about those sorts of issues. Similarly, I think most people feel really strongly about education and gun safety reforms, right? We're not talking about taking away people's guns, but we're talking about common sense, reforms such as reenacting the assault weapons ban, enacting red flag laws, things that we have in New Jersey that we take for granted that aren't at the national level and make us less safe. And so what we're doing is talking about policy in a way that makes it approachable to people who are not necessarily a part of the Democratic Party. And that's key in this district because almost half of the voters are independents, unaffiliated voters, and we need to get them on our side to affect change. And so even in areas where I am over here, reproductive rights, will give you an idea, right? I'm not going to compromise on that. I acknowledge that there are reasonable, thoughtful people that disagree with me deeply on this issue. But I talk about why I am pro-choice. And that is because I firmly believe that it is up to each woman to decide what she wants to do with her body and when, whether, and how to bring children into this world. And she should get to decide who makes that decision with her. Her doctor, her partner, her priest, her rabbi. And the only person that doesn't belong in that room is the federal government, is the government. And so I think that, my position on that issue allows for a spectrum of choice and allows for people who deeply disagree with me to make a different one. And so those are some of the issues that we're talking about, and talking about them in a way that I think makes people not be, stop talking, you liberal woman, right? And I've spent my whole career talking to people who deeply disagree with me, people who I have nothing in common with. And having that conversation and meeting people in the spaces where they are is really critical and important. And then from a strategy standpoint, we are doing everything we can to get our message out across social media, on the internet. Until the pandemic, lots of in-person meetings. And it's critically important because most people don't know that Chris Smith is their congressman. They don't know about his, extreme track record. And so it's critical to spread the word. And that's why I will talk to any group that wants to have me come talk to them. Your Brownie Troop, your mother-daughter book club, happy to just jump in and chat with folks and hear their concerns, and would love for anyone on this call to invite me to do that. And then from a strategy standpoint, one of the dirty secrets about politics is that it costs a lot of money to run for Congress in New Jersey and win. We have to buy advertising in the New York and Philadelphia media markets. This is one of the most expensive places to run in the entire United States. And Chris Smith has not faced a well-funded challenge until 2018. And so while I am not taking a dime of corporate PAC money, I'm not taking fossil fuel or energy money, this is a grassroots campaign, I am raising money, and I'm doing the work to raise that money because that is how we get our message out and we win. And I think sometimes, especially on the Democratic side, folks want to say, well, I don't think that that's how the system should be. I agree. Campaign finance reform is at the top of my agenda, right? Because it really limits the number of voices and perspectives in our system, and it harms us fundamentally. But in order to change the rules, you have to play in the system as it is and win. And so I acknowledge that money is very important in this campaign, and I'm doing the work to get it here from all over the country. And I think that is something that sets me apart from some other candidates that are running that sort of, I'm a pragmatist and I acknowledge what the world is and I work to make it better.
Yeah, I just got goosebumps hearing about your authentic grassroots campaign. That's very inspiring to know that you can make a difference and you could just use what you have to really make an impact. Along the lines of women's rights and fighting for them, we have a question. Do you find there are men in our government who are fierce advocates for women, or does it really take a woman?
No, I think we have a lot of fierce advocates. Congressman Tom Malinowski is a fierce advocate for women. There are many, and we have many allies. But I think that there are certain issues that the lived experience is just different. And you cannot, I mean, I'm an ally to my LGBTQ friends. I am an ally to our Black and Brown community, but I cannot speak as powerfully about the experience of what it means to put on your running shoes and go out to exercise and be terrified for your life. And so you need to, if you're not a part of those communities, listen to the people who have faced those experiences and become their mouthpiece and push forward the ideas that they have. But you can't, and you can be an ally and a strong advocate. And clearly we need white people to be advocates for people of color. We need men to be advocates on women's issues. But I do firmly believe that there are some experiences that people who haven't walked in those shoes can't speak as powerfully to and can't bring that perspective to the table. And that's why we will only get so far until our halls of power look a hell of a lot more like the bus that you take to work.
Going back to our current state, how do you feel about mortgage and rent forgiveness programs in response to the pandemic?
They're critically important. Congress is debating, well, the House just passed the HEROES Act, which is the fourth relief package federally. And I know a lot of that money is going to state and local governments if we can get it through so that they can push through more relief programs. This is a tough issue, right? Because how long do we forgive? And I think what's going to happen is the government is going to say, well, we sent those checks and we forgave things until July, but the ramifications are going to be felt much longer. So I think we need to have a policy that nobody is evicted from their home, rendered homeless, until we have a vaccine and a cure, right? Because the spread of this virus, particularly amongst vulnerable communities like the homeless, the shutting down of shelters. I did a lot of domestic violence work, and one of my greatest fears right now during the pandemic is both that shelters aren't letting new people in because they fear the spread of disease, and women and children are trapped in homes with violent partners and can't get out. So whether we're talking about rent and mortgage relief or programs like that, we have to be innovative and flexible, and we have to acknowledge that the crisis is going to extend much longer for most vulnerable groups of people than the spotlight is going to be on and the action is going to be taken. And the long-term solutions, the key thing here is that we are still talking as a government about the lessons we learned in this pandemic 2 years from now, that we are planning post-crisis to make sure that we're never in this situation again, that the underlying inequalities are addressed in a systemic manner, and that we're not just another crisis away from falling back into the same point. And that kind of long-term planning has become more difficult in the US government over the past decades. We've become a vicious cycle of every 4 or 8 years, just whiplashing back and forth in what our policy priorities are. And we need to have more people in all levels of policy focused on long-term planning and development in a lot of these areas to address the systemic underlying inequalities and problems in our system across the board.
Along those lines, we have another question. What can we do to help women's rights to really make a big impact so that our efforts feel worth it, especially as busy professionals with jobs that have nothing to do with politics or human rights?
Vote. Register to vote and vote. We know from the 2016 election that more people didn't vote than voted, right? That the person who was in the Oval Office was only the choice of about 24% of Americans. And so I think that making sure that you are registered to vote and voting in all elections at all levels is critical. And we are lucky enough to live in a state where we have vote by mail, and a governor who's made a decision to keep us all safe by pushing out vote by mail ballots to every single registered voter in the state for the primary, which is on July 7th. And then I think that you teach your kids about civic responsibility and voting, and you talk to your friends and your neighbors, and not, are you a Democrat, are you a Republican, but just, did you know that the deadline to register to vote is next week? Or do you know how to apply for a vote by mail ballot? I'm voting. We need to make voting cool. We need to make civic engagement cool again. We need young folks to actually understand that they have a voice and a vote, and it matters. And we have seen elections won or lost by a handful of votes. I have a friend who ran for Congress in 2018 and lost by 900 votes. She is running again, and the incumbent congressman there is so afraid of her that he dropped out rather than run against her again. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of votes, and it was decided by just 900. And so I really think that that's critical. And then just getting involved. Your representatives do what they hear the most about, right? So I know people are like, oh, it's dorky to email or call my local official. But if 100 people are calling every day about issue X, and only those 100 people care, that congressperson might actually think that everybody cares about that issue. And nobody's calling about like women's rights because, my God, it's 2020. And why are we having the same fight that our great grandmothers did? So I think it's important to just engage and make your voice heard and known. And then acknowledging that we are all limited, and it can be exhausting. This environment we find ourselves in is, quite frankly, just draining and taxing on the soul.
Yeah.
And so it's okay to take a break. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And we need to all allow each other the space and time for self-care and taking a step back. And so when you are able to engage, you are doing it for all those people who can't. And then when you take a step back, there's another sister that's going to step forward. And so I think being in this community and strategizing about how we can lift one another up and advocate for the issues that we care about is critically important, because we can't all do it all the time.
Speaking of being drained, the next question is about campaign challenges. What role do you think technology plays in promoting politically charged misinformation, and what do you think needs to happen to rectify that?
Yeah, it's interesting because everybody likes to talk about all the good that technology does, but we're right. The 2016 at the State Department, I saw, doing that Freedom Online Coalition work, what we were doing was countering disinformation efforts on the web by Russia, by China, by terrorist organizations, groups that are looking to harness the internet to do very, very bad things, right? And the US's posture, and those of governments that agree with us, is that, we need to promote free speech online. But then there's been a rise in hate speech and terroristic actions, right? So how do we balance the need to allow people their right to free speech while making sure that disinformation, that hate crimes, that calls to terroristic action are not disseminating across the web? And I think as Americans, it's particularly fraught for us because we have a constitutional history of allowing speech to flourish. And we're now seeing what the dark side of that is, I think, particularly in our elections. So to me, the most important thing, and I try to do this, is if I see a post and know it's like a piece of disinformation, a false source, I flag it, I report it. I tell people that are posting it that it's wrong. And I think we need to just take much more action at the federal government level. It's another reason why tech folks need to run for office, right? Did anyone witness that hearing where Mark Zuckerberg was being questioned by elderly gentlemen who did not even understand what the phone was that they were holding or how it communicated? It's terrifying to me that we have so many people making these laws that don't even understand how the internet works. So generational change is important there as well. But I think that we need to take a long, hard look at the dark underbelly of technology and the problems that it can cause, and have a serious conversation about that. Because if we're only talking about the benefits of technology, we've lost out. Now, for me on the campaign trail, it's become absolutely critical, right? Two and a half months ago, we had to put everything online. So everything I do now is through social media or a forum like this. And, usually campaigns minimize tech and online forums in favor of good old-fashioned door knocking and in-person meetings. And I think we're going to see, we now know the limits of that. And this is going to be a really interesting electoral cycle from a tech standpoint, because how do you break through? How do you make that connection with somebody when you're not seeing them in person and able to relate to them? And so I'm really thankful for this opportunity tonight for you guys to help me practice. I'm a hugger. I'm a glad
virtual hugs.
I'm an extrovert, and so coming to you through the computer screen is not something that I'm fully comfortable with. And we know Joe Biden isn't comfortable with it, right? But we all could use, it's a real opportunity for tech savvy people and people with innovative ideas about how to reach folks to get involved in political campaigns, because we need your help. And this is not an area where there's a ton of expertise or a rule book. Somebody was like, how are you campaigning during the pandemic? And I was like, they didn't teach this in Run for Congress school. So we're just, we're winging it, and we're thinking today about how to reach people and get our message out. So anybody who wants to share our posts or join the team, please do spread the word.
Definitely will. And so one last question, just going back to your career, you talked about, how you rose through the ranks and how you faced adversity and different challenges. You spoke about speaking up and fighting the good fight. But in order to make it, up that ladder, there's landmines on the way that you got to avoid. You can't fight every single fight as loud as you possibly can, because you either become ineffective or white noise, or people, you get a target on your back, which, as women, a lot of times you already have anyway. So do you have any advice for people, especially women, that are trying to, maybe figure out which are the right battles to double down on, and which ones are the ones you should strategically, sit back on, or should you never sit back and just full force ahead at all costs to, make an impact and try and get where you're going?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jenna. And, I will say one thing. The vast majority of people in my life don't know that I quit the law firm under protest the way I did. Only the managing partner, you all, and some of those female associates that I was speaking up for knew why I left, or what I was doing, because I was afraid to make a big public stink about it. I kind of left, but then did it quietly and slunk away and was like, oh, well, that's not the place for me, because I was afraid to ruin my legal career and be known as, bossy, stubborn, obstinate, loud woman. I think that we all need to look. I was in a position of privilege that I knew I could go back to my parents' house and wait it out and find the next opportunity. And a lot of people can't afford to do that. Right. So number one is you look out for you and your family and your situation, and nobody will ever say bad on you if you did what you needed to keep food on the table and a roof over people's heads. So that's one. Two, I think that you need to listen to your gut. Everybody has different red lines, right? And one of the things that I learned in the world of diplomacy is that it's so important to set those and then hold people accountable for them, because you lose a piece of yourself if you set a bright line that you cannot cross this is non-negotiable for me, and then you let it go. It does real damage to yourself. And in the world of international relations, it's, the one thing that you can't do. You can't say, you cannot, use mustard gas on people and then allow a regime to use mustard gas and not have public consequences, right? Your word is your bond. So I think that, you need to have those conversations with yourself and those close to you about what that red line in the sand is that you will always stand up for in order to maintain your sense of self and your value and dignity and worth as a person. And, that's how I made my decisions, and I don't regret them. But it's also, there are quiet ways to achieve things too. I'm not a quiet person.
Me neither.
I'm a lawyer and a loudmouth and somebody running for Congress because I like the fight. And I like fighting on behalf of other people. But that might not be your thing. But I guarantee you, there is somebody like me in your life, in your workplace. And you should seek those people out. And if you're comfortable, share your experience. Because when I've gone to battle, I go to battle with the stories of many women who were not able, because of their circumstances, to stand up. I helped Jackie Spear write that legislation because it wasn't just my experience. It was my friend who was, fired from her assignment because she got pregnant for a second time in a 2-year tour. It was my friend who was violently assaulted on a military base by a fellow State Department employee, and there were no ramifications because they were in a war zone. And so you gather those stories up and you find the people that you trust and can share them with, and then you use them when you have an opportunity to make change. And so I do think that there's just a power in sharing your story with one other person. And it may be somebody who's in a position to do something, or it may be somebody that you see who's below you or suffering something that you once did, and you can just say, I see you, I know what's happening, you are not alone. Because you may not be in a position to publicly help them, but you can privately validate them. And I think that that's important too. So every day we all get up and make decisions that have trade-offs and costs. And at the end of the day, you have to be able to look yourself in the mirror and be okay with what's happened. And we all make mistakes and we all fall down, but you just get up again and fight harder. And I think that's the story of my life. Some people would look at pieces of it and say, I would have been broken. And in the moment I was. And sometimes it takes a day and sometimes it takes a year. And sometimes you live with that experience forever.
Yep.
But you just have to hold on because you're worth it. And we need a hell of a lot more women fighting and pressing forward and doing this really tough work. And you're doing it every day. You're fighting for women's rights and human rights every day that you go into the workforce, and show people that there's a different face to power and there's a different face to expertise than they might have grown up with or seen modeled. And it's a powerful thing. And there are people watching you right now, even if it's just your kids, that are learning so much from the powerful example that a working mom sets. And so power on, people, and thank you so much for everything that you're doing. And I hope to meet you all in person over the course of this campaign and when we're allowed to gather again. And thank you, Jenna and Brittany and Allison, for organizing such a great group. This in itself is an act of resistance and strengthening, and it's really powerful to be a part of it. Thank you.
Beautifully said, Stephanie. I have complete chills. I'm teary-eyed. You just exuberate this amazing, inspiring energy that I think we all really could use and take into our daily lives. So thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for your advice. Thank you for representing us and fighting the good fight. We're actually going to send out a newsletter to all of our subscribers. We're going to post some stuff in our social channels. So I'll reach out to you. Anything you want to send, we'll share your socials. Stephanie for New Jersey on Facebook and LinkedIn. Make sure you guys are following along. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. Night, guys.
Bye, guys. Thank you.